I am presently engaged in scientific research at the Hahn Foundation. My field is high-energy physics. I differ from my colleagues in one important respect. I am a chicken. That is, I look like a chicken, I have the external attributes of a chicken, beak, feathers, wings, and so on. Being male, I sport a handsome comb. I eat chicken feed. However, the statement I am a chicken does not convey the full truth. I don't think like a chicken. I don't mix with other chickens socially. I know of no other chicken doing research work into subatomic particles. I know of no other chicken capable of expressing itself in English. By the way, I can't really speak English, but I can understand it, and as you may have gathered, I can write English, though on a special purpose-built typewriter. You can hear my voice thanks to an electronically controlled computer system. My speed isn't very good yet. That probably accounts for my style, my short, pithy sentences. At one time, I wasn't a chicken. How come I'm a chicken? Your query, my problem. I've got a lot of explaining to do. I was born in England. I had an unexceptional middle-class background. In the sixth form, I always came top in physics. I read physics and mathematics at Cambridge. I was awarded a double first. After my PhD, I contributed articles and learned papers and held lectures at international conferences. I became very well known in my field. One day I received an invitation to visit the Weizmann Institute in Israel. I accepted. All expenses were paid. I booked a flight, and within a month I was in the Middle East. I had just given my first series of lectures and had time on my hands. I was not a chicken then. I decided to do some touring and see something of the country. I was particularly intrigued by Old Jerusalem. For instance, the Armenian Quarter is full of jewelry and antique shops. I was looking for a present for my mother. My eye was attracted by an antique oriental lamp. It was like something straight out of 1001 Nights. Yes, that was it. It was just like Aladdin's lamp. Having bought it, I congratulated myself on the find. Jerusalem impressed me deeply. All that history. I saw the Western Wall, the Dome of the Rock, and the Holy Sepulchre. Outside the city wall, I found a church that commemorated St. Peter and the cock that crew 3 times. The priest was kind enough to show me some excavations around the foundations of the church. Apparently, they used to store corn in the cavities hewn into the rock. It was also interesting. Next day I went to a town in the vicinity. Roaming its streets, I came across the old market area, or souk. The shops were all open, like those old-fashioned fishmongers I used to know. Booths and stalls lined the streets. Nearly all the vendors were in the food line: vegetables, fruit, meat, I'll come to that shortly, and spices. Chickens! Bark! I'd never seen so many, dead or alive. First I only saw dead ones. They were either piled up on boards or stone slabs, or suspended from beams and rails. Their slit throats afforded no pretty sight, I can assure you. Having turned into a narrow arcade, I could hear heart-rending clucking noises. Once round a corner, I found myself in a street chock full of crates containing chickens. One after the other, the crates were being winched up to overhead abattoirs. Once a crateful had been processed, the plastic crate was dumped into the street for reuse. Not being a vegetarian, I felt no inclination to dwell on the way the chickens met their end, or allow myself to get maudlin. At first, that is. After a few minutes, though the collective fate of the chickens may not have caused me undue concern, I was at least able to feel pity for any individual chicken that happened to attract my notice out of the great mass. Whenever a little nervous or worried, I always used to rub any object that I was holding. As it happened, I was holding that Aladdin's lamp at that time. Then I noticed something that disturbed me. This chicken was looking up at me. It seemed to be pleading with me. It was almost as if it knew what fate had in store for it. I felt sorry for that chicken like I'd never felt sorry for a chicken before. I was becoming increasingly nervous. Now it was fixing me with those dull eyes, those dull, questing eyes. How would you be feeling if your throat was about to be slit? You, as a human being, share in the collective guilt of your species for perpetrating this outrage, you know. You have your personal share in this catastrophe. What you gonna do about it, boy? Now I was on the borderline between very nervous and extremely nervous. Not another guilt complex. My resistance was cracking. If only there was something I could do about all this, I thought. The chicken cocked its head as though to suggest we swap places. My degree of nervousness was now at the other end of the extremely nervous band, touching on panic. I was shaking all over. I wish I really knew what it was like to be in that chicken's position, I thought, mouthing the words audibly. My wish was granted. I had only myself to blame. I had become a chicken, and there was nothing I could do about it. Some kind of transfer must have taken place. I saw the body of my earlier self wobble and cluck down the street like a frightened chicken. The lamp had fallen into the gutter. An old man picked it up, my last hope, and vanished round a bale of straw. Thus it was that I came to know what it was really like being a chicken, cooped up in a crate in death row. No fun. My first thought was, how did I get into this fix? My second was, how do I get out of it? And my third, just panic. As though all this wasn't enough, I felt extremely uncomfortable. There were other chickens in the crate, too many. I felt like having a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. The prospect of getting them was very bleak. The prospect of having my throat slit was far from remote. More panic. I gave myself a peck. It's just a nightmare, I thought. Roger Hercules, snap out of it. I had just to wake up and everything would be fine, just fine. People don't turn into chickens in real life. How did I get these feathers then? This was no time for philosophizing. In such a situation the mind is wonderfully concentrated. Nothing is taken for granted. You think fast and extremely lucidly. We were up. I edged over to the farthest corner from my enemy. My chances of survival would increase the more time I had to make observations. Then the enemy seized one of the chickens, simultaneously grabbing its neck with one hand and its feet with the other. He held the chicken upside down, then cut its throat. As slaughtering methods go, this method is doubtless quite humane. At that point in time, however, I was in no position to adopt such a sanguine academic approach. After observing the process a few times, I worked out a survival strategy. Clearly, I would have to use my beak. I had to incapacitate the enemy long enough for me to effect my escape. I remembered there was a pile of sacks on the ground which, provided that I fell from the left hand of the stage, I'd be able to make a soft landing on. Precisely when would I strike? When the enemy first put his hand in the crate? No, for then he would trap me in the crate, and I wouldn't have a dog's chance, or a chicken's chance. No, I would have to let him grab me by the legs and neck. If I appeared passive and apathetic, I might be able to catch him off guard. I noticed that a period of 2 or 3 seconds elapsed when the chicken was held dangling neck downwards while the enemy grabbed his knife. I could just possibly strike then, but the timing would have to be dead right. A second too soon or too late, and curtains. I did get the timing right. I had to. I cut his wrist. When he let me go, I darted for the left side of the stage. I missed the sacks but landed on some empty crates. Recovering from my fall, I ran between people's legs, under stalls and skirted walls until I found a relatively secure place in a pile of refuse in an open space at the edge of the market. At last I could take a breather. Under the circumstances, I was prepared to share my new habitat with lice, mice and cockroaches without demur. What alternative was there? By this time I was feeling distinctly peckish. After nightfall I would embark on a scavenging expedition. Now that I had survived the first physical crisis, I became painfully aware that I had to face a psychological dilemma which would prove no less daunting in its own way. The problem involved the question of deciding who or what I now was. A chicken? Something in between? First, arguments in favour of the contention that I, all appearances notwithstanding, was a man. I experienced the thoughts and feelings of a man. My memories were those of a human being. Argument against. I evinced all the external attributes of a chicken. Was I some kind of hybrid, like a minotaur or mermaid? This was an agonizing thought. I wanted to know which side of the borderline I was. I couldn't stand the idea of being in a limbo. Therefore, I purposed to think of myself only as a human being. Human beings don't change into chickens. Counter-argument. What makes you so sure? Retort. This absurd contention runs counter to the sum of all human experience. It has never happened before. There can always be a first time. An unsuppressible voice spoke to me. Thus continued the interior dialogue. But the physical laws of the universe rule out the possibility of such a change. The free reallocation of subatomic particles, the essential nature of which still remains a mystery to modern science, might give rise to such a phenomenon. The science of paraphysics is very young, but the chances of such a change coming about are infinitesimal, totally negligible. Explain why you're a chicken, then. I simply had to prove that I wasn't a chicken, despite the apparent evidence of my sensory perceptions. There was no point in denying that the sensory evidence I was receiving pointed to my being the putative chicken. In dreams we experience visual and auditory impressions which, it transpires, do not correspond to the incidents of real life. The dreamer is not aware that he is dreaming, as his critical faculties are in abeyance until the point of waking. Our sense impressions during our waking hours, however, convey a coherent and rationally verifiable whole. In dreams, elements based on memories of the real world interact in a manner which proves incompatible with our experience of reality. If we wish to decipher the true significance of a dream, we must consider the symbolic meaning behind it, the synthesizing operations of the subconscious, and so on. Yet my dream seemed to be inextricably involved in my experience of the real world. Had I been dreaming when I bought the lamp in Jerusalem? Had I been dreaming when I walked through the souk? Had I been dreaming when I felt pity for that chicken just before my apparent metamorphosis? Perhaps my memories of everything to that point had been real, but why should the changeover occur just at that point? Might I have fallen asleep on my feet? But then human beings don't do that sort of thing, even if some chickens do. Perhaps I had walked on, spent the rest of the day doing something or other, and finally gone to sleep in the usual way. My subconscious had simply suppressed all memory of events after my meeting with the chicken. So all I had to do was wait until I woke up. I waited and waited, but I remained a chicken. Besides, I was conscious of being in full possession of my daytime critical faculties. When we wake up, these return to us. Only then are we able to recognize that we have been dreaming, as we can remember having woken up from them. Perhaps I'd gone mad, but here the objections to the dream hypothesis would also apply. Hallucinatory states are attended by a loss of one's rational faculties. Hallucinations can hardly continue for hours on end without the loss of their quasi-logical coherence. Finally, I gave up a prayer in the hope of striking a bargain with my Creator. Would God change me back into a human form if I tithed my income for charitable purposes and devoted the rest of my life to the quest for religious truth? No deal, I remained a chicken. In the given situation, I had to devise some kind of strategy. I deliberated that 3 approaches lay open to me. A. Try to re-establish contact with the human world. B. Go chicken. C. Remain in splendid isolation. Approach A would involve considerable physical risk. Would I have time to convince the first human being with whom I gained contact that I wasn't a chicken? Experimentation with my vocal cords had established that I was unable to produce a sound much different from that of any other chicken. Given the tools, I would be able to write, but would I be given enough time to prove my skill? The B option was even more problematic. Would other chickens accept me on equal terms? What common language would there be? What intellectual stimulation was there to expect? Even then, the danger of having my throat slit remained. No one feeds chickens out of the goodness of their heart. Might I not be able to start up some kind of chicken's lip movement? Little reflection was necessary to reveal the futility of such an ambition. Willy-nilly, I would have to adopt course C, for the time being at least. I would survive somehow, hoping that something would turn up. I might be able to get out of this mess the same way that I got into it. If only I could lay my claws on that lamp. I would lie low during the day, forage and explore during the night. It was now dark, and I was ready for my first meal. I waited until the sound of footsteps died down. The moon was shining when I eventually came out. I pecked at anything that might prove edible for a chicken. Sometimes I made a lucky strike, but more often than not, all I found was grit. The night was saved when I found a bag full of chicken feed. Having taken my fill, I returned to the refuse pile and lay low for the day. Next night, I went foraging again. This routine continued for a few days longer. I couldn't imagine myself going on like this forever. It was intellectual suicide. The day arrived when they came to collect the refuse. I was sleeping at the time. Despite the rude awakening, I kept my cool. Slowly and deliberately, I strutted into the open. When one of the refuse collectors pointed at me, I did a sort of Charlie Chaplin walking act. This had the desired effect of freezing the dustmen in their tracks. Once I was offside, I moosed away as fast as I could. And I didn't stop running till I found the welcoming area. I came across a large chicken farm just off the road, connecting the town where I was and Jerusalem. I squeezed my way through the opening in the wire fence. The chickens there were still asleep. There was fresh water and chicken feed galore to be had. After a good meal, I decided it was time to go. It was obvious that the chickens were being reared to supply the market with eggs and meat. I got out the way I had come in. My nocturnal visits to the chicken farm turned into something of a routine. Then the inevitable happened. The farmer must have suspected that something strange was up. It may have been my claw prints that gave the game away. One night I got into the run as usual, ate my fill, and it was now time to leave. You can well imagine my consternation on finding that the opening in the fence had been wired up. Thus I was trapped. My only hope lay in remaining as inconspicuous as possible, for as long as possible. Perhaps I would be able to construct a secret tunnel. The trouble was that I was in a hen run. I didn't particularly mind the hens amorously brushing up against me. I felt threatened by the only other rooster in the run. Apparently his role in the setup was to sire chicks. He didn't want any potential rival to challenge his monopoly of ruling the roost. One day he strutted up to me, and it was obvious he was going to pick a fight. He lunged his beak at me, made threatening gestures with his claws, flapped his wings irately, and crew for all he was worth. The shindy attracted the farmer's attention. The game was up. There was nothing for it but to do my Charlie Chaplin act. The farmer scratched his head and called his wife. I then adopted a more operatic pose, holding one wing over my chest and slowly raising the other in time with the crescendo of an aria. They took me indoors and made phone calls. Soon a number of gentlemen arrived. I did a repeat performance. Then a van arrived. They put me in a box and left for an unknown destination. I was able to look out of the ventilation hole. All I could ascertain was that we were heading south. After 40 minutes driving, the van stopped. Then I looked out. The scene was strangely familiar. Then it came to me. I was back at the Weizmann Institute. But what a fate awaited me now? Dissection? Vivisection? Were they going to observe me for the benefit of animal behavior research? First, they gave me liberal helpings of chicken feed. Can't be bad, I thought. I was then replaced in my box and carried down a long corridor. I've never seen so many caged mice in all my life. There were literally thousands of them. I was carried into a large laboratory and placed in a pen at the front. A number of observers were present. They scrutinized my appearance, movements, and behavior. They expected a performance, and I gave them one. I gave them everything I had in my repertoire. They took down notes assiduously. One of them smiled slightly when I did the Charlie Chaplin jig. Some of the observers spoke to each other in English. I heard a voice that was familiar. Yes, it was one of the professors I had met. It was one of Professor Kaufmann's colleagues. I'd even had a drink with him. Kaufmann was a Boston physicist with whom I had exchanged notes and findings. This gave me an idea. When they left, I found that I could make scratch marks in the boards of the floor of my pen. What should I write? It couldn't be anything too long. Then I had a brainwave. Kaufmann, followed by a formula familiar to anyone engaged in atomic research. When they came, I pointed at the marks I'd made in the boarding. Only one man seemed to take note of them. The others were more interested in my dancing talents. When the session was over, I gave the American a knowing look. He stayed behind afterwards. I pointed at the barely legible writing again. He nodded and left. An hour and a half later, both he and Kaufmann entered the room. I pointed at the formula. Kaufmann's face lit up. In the meantime, I had added new words. Pen, ink. They left. Next day, they took me out of the pen. I soon found myself in a small laboratory which had been placed at Kaufmann's disposal during his stay at the Institute. Pen and ink were waiting on the table. The rest was plain sailing. I wrote, "You ask, I write, okay." During the ensuing question and answer session, Kaufmann soon came to realize that I had an immense grasp of the subject. He seemed particularly intrigued by my knowledge of subatomic particles. He cottoned on. I could prove useful. I had read some of his papers. He was good, but not that good. Being very ambitious, he needed all the help he could get. He made a proposal, and I was in no position to turn it down. Yes, we were going to collaborate. I am presently his unofficial research assistant in the States. That is where you came in. Just recently, he has published a series of very interesting, one might say brilliant research papers which have bowled over the scientific world. What do I get out of it? As Kaufmann once darkly intimated just before Christmas, I would be game for anyone in the butchery line should I ever leave the security of his laboratory. Reports of a wonder chicken that had leaked into the press were subsequently denied as a hoax. If anyone finds something answering to the description of an Aladdin's lamp, will they please contact Dr. Gallicanto, P.O. GAL 740, Boston, Massachusetts. That's my cover name. Kaufmann's secretary had to be let in on the secret. She thinks I'm cute and arranged for the P.O. box. Bipeds of the world unite. Thanks.